Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I'm your host, Josh Fromm, and we are here with two really special guests today. We're going to be talking about adoption today. We're going to do something that we've been talking about doing on Life Report since day one and never got around to it. And now we've got a chance to talk about adoption with two local adoption experts, which I think is really cool. So let me introduce our guests. We have Laurel Boylan, who is the founder of God's Waiting Children, which is an organization that orchestrates orphan ministries, hosting programs, and international adoption facilitation services in Ukraine. So we've got international adoption expert here, and then we've got domestic adoption expert here. It's Stephanie Grant, our old friend, executive director of Infant of Prague, which is an organization that facilitates domestic adoption. So we're going to get kind of the experts from both sides so we can really get a good handle on this issue. I think there's a lot of confusion about adoption among both pro-life and pro-choice people. So I thought it would be helpful for us to kind of help, if this show is about helping you to talk to other people about life issues better, then you understanding how adoption works, so that when people say things that maybe aren't quite correct, you'll be able to have a better conversation. So let me just have, I'll start with you, Laurel. I just want you both to kind of briefly describe your organization, what services you offer, and that'll kind of help us lay a foundation. Go ahead.
Sure. God's Waiting Children works with families who are interested in either doing missionary type work in the country of Ukraine, hosting a child, an orphan from Ukraine over a short period of time in their home, or wanting to adopt from that country. We also do a lot of adoption training, adoption ministry type of work, and we do a lot of fundraising, helping people find ways and grants and fundraising events that will help them fund for an adoption. You're helping bridge that gap where people want to do an international adoption, but it's so expensive. You're helping them to solve some of those issues so they can do that. There's a lot of help out there, but most people who go at it alone don't realize what help there is. So we connect families, and a lot can be done when we all come together. That's super cool. Stephanie, tell us about Infant of Prague.
Absolutely. We are a full-service adoption agency. We've been in the Fresno area since 1953, so this is our 60th year.
Wow.
And we work with birth moms that have an unplanned pregnancy. We walk alongside them in crisis. Sometimes they choose to parent. We connect them to resources. And when they do make a plan of adoption, we practice open adoption, meaning they choose the family. And we also work with adoptive families and preparing them to take placement of a child. Through the home study process, we have a 6-week class with 12 hours of instruction that really gives them a great foundation of what adoption is going to be like for the lifelong, term of it for everybody involved. And we also have licensed therapists on staff that provide adoption counseling, therapy services to adoptees across the lifespan, birth parents, and adoptive families.
Let's talk a little bit about what the process of adoption is like, because I think there's a lot of people that kind of want to adopt in kind of this nebulous, like we've always said, we want to adopt one day. Not that we've ever gone to an adoption agency and talked to someone and really learned a lot about it. So there's kind of always, one day I would like to do that. And I wonder, it might be helpful for people to have a better understanding of exactly how this process works. So let's start with you, Stephanie. Give us a picture on how domestic adoption, how that typically works, and then we'll talk about what are the differences between that and international adoption.
Okay, great. Too, I think, Josh, with adoption, people tend to kind of lump it all under one umbrella, and adoption is a very diverse practice depending on which route you go, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and you really have to figure out for your family what's going to be the best fit. And I used to work in foster care, so I worked in the FOST-ADOPT system as well, which is another way to adopt, and it's really important for kids that are not going to reunify with their family in the FOST-ADOPT world that they have a permanent home. And so that's another area of adoption that's quite different than what we do at Infant of Prague, which is domestic infant adoption, meaning that 99.9% of our adoptions happen right from the hospital, right when the baby is born. And so the family normally takes that baby right home from the hospital. And like I said before, our birth parents do choose the family as our couples go through the process and become certified and ready, a waiting family, as we say. They've jumped through all the hoops. They've gone through our 6-week class. They've been home studied, and basically what the home study means is they've, it's like an in-depth psychosocial assessment. We've thoroughly assessed, that they are solid and their marriage is strong and that type of thing. Also, the state requires us to, we do a home inspection. They have to meet all the criteria that a foster parent would meet. Like medications locked up. If they have a pool, they have to have a 5-foot fence and that type of thing.
Right.
So once they've jumped through all those hoops and are waiting family, they put together an album, a photo album we call it, with a letter to the birth parent. Basically, the photo album just gives a real picture of what life would be like in their home, vacations, their likes, maybe pictures of their dogs, and the birth mom that's choosing, she's going to be able to see, if she chooses this family, this is what life's going to look like. And then so from there, when they do get chosen, I think the other thing that's really important to know here is every situation is different, as well, as far as what openness looks like. And I think a lot of times people coming into adoption, they have a lot of misconceptions about what openness is, and it depends on the comfort level of both parties, and people are never forced to go into a situation they're not comfortable with.
Well, let's talk about that before we even get into the international adoption process. We hear these terms, open and closed adoption. I'm not sure most people know what that actually means. So you've said something very quickly about something I want you to spend some more time talking about. Help our audience understand open and closed adoption, what people mean by that, and why there's so much diversity between those two fields.
Sure. Closed means confidential. So there, in the past, adoptions were all closed, where in the way, in fact, really, we've been around since 1953, so we practiced confidential closed adoptions in the past. And back in the day when birth moms were sent away to a maternity home and they never met the adoptive family, they had the child, and the child was whisked away possibly, and adoptive families really didn't receive a lot of information about the birth family back then either. So our practice has changed tremendously, and really we've seen how how much more positive some information, even if it's limited information, how that plays out for all parties involved. It's so much better. It's so much healthier for adoptees to grow up and know their story and have access to where they came from, and it's part of who they are, their identity. And for adoptive parents to have that information, and you think about how important it is to have medical information when you take your child to the doctor, and just how it plays out along the child's lifespan and in that family system. We've got feedback over the years from our adoptive families how much they just love the fact that they have access to the birth parent. So open meaning that there's a communication, and every relationship looks different, But then also with openness, how that relates to the birth parent is our birth parents are in the driver's seat right from the beginning. When they come to us in crisis with an unexpected pregnancy, they choose whether they want to make a plan of parenting or they want to make a plan of adoption. If they choose adoption, they are in the driver's seat as far as what type of family that they're looking for to raise their child, and they look through the albums and choose that family. And they're in the driver's seat too, as far as we have some birth moms that want to meet the family and others that don't. Sometimes they come to us and their pregnancy is confidential from their own family system. So what are some of the? This is the last question I'll ask you about this, and then we'll jump to Laurel. What are some of the misconceptions about open adoption? I think there's a lot of people that are really concerned about what that might look like, and so just help just kind of illuminate that area for us. Absolutely. Well, I know one of the common misconceptions is co-parenting. They think open adoption means that you have the adoptive family and the birth family both parenting, and that really isn't true. Our birth moms that make a plan of adoption, they're choosing the family. They're choosing adoption because they're not ready to parent for whatever reason that they are choosing the adoptive mom and dad to become the parent. The other thing I think people, and I think maybe from watching a TV movie or a story that you heard in the past, but they think of the stalking birth mom that's going to that either stalk the adoptive family or change her mind 6 months later. And with agency adoption, there's actually only a 48-hour window that a birth parent has to change her mind. But also, I would say with the comprehensive counseling that we provide birth moms, we are not even going to go down that road of adoption unless we're pretty certain that she wants to make a plan of adoption.
Okay, so let's go to international adoption. Tell us about, contrast for us, what is different about, I mean, there's going to be obviously some significant differences between domestic and international adoption. What does that process look like?
Well, sure. The process is very different in that the family in most countries must actually travel to the country where the child's from to do the adoption. And every country varies in how the process works. For instance, in Ukraine, the adoption actually happens in Ukraine. The matching of a family with a child happens in Ukraine. And so that's why we're not an agency. We just help families go through the process, navigate through the Department of Homeland Security and the immigration process and so forth and the paperwork, and then hook them up with reliable people on the other end who then, take it from there. And so when you go to court, you are going to court only a week or two after bonding and meeting with your child. And then 10 days later, after the appeals period, the adoption is final. Wow. So by the time you bring your child home, into your home and meeting your family members, that adoption's final in Ukraine. Right. And then if the family chooses, California, it's optional, whether they want to re-adopt here in California or not. We encourage most families to go ahead and do that. But that's a very simple process compared to adopting a child from the start.
So pros and cons of international adoption, what would they be?
I think one of the main reasons, we have two reasons people usually contact us for international. One, they are drawn to a particular country because of their own origin, or they know of somebody who just adopted from that country and they feel moved to research that. Or they have heard somebody's horror story locally, and they just think all adoptions will fall along that path, so they decide, I don't want to deal with, that, and they'll want to go overseas. And they want the adoption to be final. They don't want to risk having somebody change their mind once the child's in their home. Right. The negative part of it is that it's very expensive. Depending on the country, it can be very, very time-consuming. Ukraine, we typically do in less than 6 months, but most countries are a year or more. So it depends. And
you have to spend a long time in the country too, right?
Well, every country varies. Okay. Some countries require 2 or 3 trips, but they're not necessarily very long. Okay. In Ukraine, each adoption from the time you arrive to the time you leave with your child is approximately 6 weeks. But there's 3 different ways a family can do it. They can make 1 trip, 2 trips, or make both of them travel and then one come back right after court. The other one just stay to bring the child home, which is what most families do. That's the cheapest. So,
and you said that there's because the cost is greater, there's a lot of grants that are out there to help with that. Talk to us a little bit about that. I've heard of Stephen Curtis Chapman's foundation.
Sure.
So just talk to us a little bit about those, about what is out there for people that are wanting to do international. Sure. And now I'm going to ask you if there's also grants for domestic adoption, obviously.
There's foundations all over the United States that have been touched by adoption, missionary work, or foreign adoption in some way. Each of them have their own criteria. Some are income dependent, most are not. Some require you adopt a certain age child or a certain number of children or a child with a special need. Others do not. And so that's where one of our missionary projects is to stay on top of what's available and to help families. We also believe in families connecting with other families for fundraising, and the power of Facebook and the power of the internet is amazing in trying to raise money for an adoption. You share a story out there and people will end up, raising the money. It's just really, really fun to see come together.
Are there also grants and things out there for people that want to do domestic adoption but don't have a lot of money for that?
Absolutely. And Stephen Curtis Chapman also provides grants for domestic adoption. Okay. Also, there is a tax credit that was just renewed. I don't know the exact number, but it's 13,000 something. That's a tax credit, which is a great support for.
It's foreign or domestic.
And that's great. The other thing with Infinite Prong, we have a sliding scale. And so we try to make it as affordable as we can for more individuals, and knowing that it is a financial commitment. We have found with our families too that they are just really creative in different ways that they fundraise. A lot of times family and friends will help. We also do the way we set up our payment plan is in steps, and so we have families that will, hey, we're going to save money up to this certain step, and they take their time through the process, and we just work with them that way.
I met a guy named Kevin. I bought a crib from him on Craigslist. So I drove way out there and I met this guy. He's a super cool guy. Had this great crib for us. And he's an international adoptive parent. And I think, I don't remember how many, I think 3 or 4 from China, I think. And so he's telling me kind of his story, and it was really, really cool. But he said something really interesting that I'd never heard. And he said that he and his wife knew other people that have adopted domestically, and that some families that have done domestic adoption kind of look down on them because they did international. And then he said this can happen the other way too. Some international families will look down on people that only adopted domestically, and so there's like this animosity. And he was expressing some kind of like, not just frustration but like sadness that like, isn't it a bummer that we can't just be like, he said I don't have any problem with people that adopt domestically. So I would like both of you to kind of speak to that. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but what would you tell families that have some of these kind of feelings that are kind of anti the opposite kind of adoption that they did?
First of all, I say adoption is beautiful. It's a wonderful entity, and but like we said before, it's not a one size fits all, and every family has to figure out what's going to be the best fit for them. And from foster adopt to domestic adoption to international, they're all very different, but they're all beautiful and wonderful. And it's bringing a child into your home, and I know, Lauren, just from personal experience, you can probably speak more to that as an adoptive mom and adopting both internationally and domestically. So you've got a great she's an expert in that area just right in her home. But I would say, to me, I kind of equate it with people that look down on my husband and I when our children went to Christian high school or when we homeschooled for a bit, and people can be a little bit judgmental about somebody else that chooses something different than themselves. And I think that in adoption, because it's so there's so many misconceptions and stuff, it's really important is to stay, educate people when we have the information. And I think with more information, people will be able to see beyond some of the, those biases and negativity, because it definitely, we don't want to, I know there's no judgment here for somebody who wants to go international or go foster adopt. I worked in the foster care system. There are a lot of kids who need a permanent home in that arena. So it's definitely not, specific type of adoption isn't right for everybody. You got to figure out what's going to be a good fit.
Laura.
I couldn't agree more. Being educated about every option. We have 5 adopted children, my husband and I. We've done both the domestic open adoption as well as international. And our reasoning for doing domestic first was because neither of us had a biological child. We really wanted an infant. We kind of wanted to go through parenting the natural way. Once we experienced the infant, we were okay with adopting waiting children. And in our case, we were in our late 30s, approaching 40. We didn't necessarily want to start with infants the whole way. So we adopted a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And then a year later, went back and adopted a 6-year-old and almost 8-year-old. And so our reasons were personal. They had to do with age and just what was right for our family. And that's what I tell family. There is no right or wrong. It depends on you, your desires, your openness to international travel, your openness to chaos, which can happen in any adoption, but especially when you're dealing with foreign governments. So I just encourage people to get educated on everything and then make the adoption plan that feels good to them.
Yeah. Let's talk about this Russia thing. A few months ago, Russia basically banned Americans from adopting Russian children. And this is now in effect. In fact, you said you know someone who is being really affected by this. So real quick, if you could kind of explain what's going on there, and also tell us about your friend, just to give us a personal idea of how this can impact people.
Well, sure. Currently, President Putin got angry and came out with some public statements that were very, very strong, basically saying not only is he stopping adoption, but that he would not allow those families who'd already traveled and met a child or already gone to court to finalize the process to bring them home. A lot's happened since that news article hit. The State Department has been very active in daily trying to work out an amendable solution. At the moment, we don't have anything in writing, but the agencies are being told that anybody who has gone to court may be allowed to finish their adoption as long as it finishes by January 2014 because of the treaty that was signed last summer between the two countries. We've been told unofficially that anyone who's actually met their child may be allowed in the next few months to go back to court and finalize their adoption. But until we see something in writing from the State Department, I'm encouraging any family in that situation to not book a ticket. You know, you need to have support and make sure that once you get over there, you're really going to be allowed to bring the child home.
This affects a lot of people. I mean, I read there's around 1,000 kids from Russia that have been adopted by Americans in just, I think, 2010. So I'm kind of curious from both of you, what was your reaction when you heard this? Is this just a frustrating, why are we bringing politics and have this affect kids? Just kind of give me your reactions to this.
My personal reaction? Yeah. Oh, I was livid. I was so livid, like yelling and screaming, and then I fell into sadness and literally was crying because I have a friend who was supposed to be traveling the very next week to bring their, go to court, and that was their second trip. And they had their little boys stocking on their mantle. They have 5 other children. They'd all been bonding with Sergei, and they hadn't actually met him yet. The family had met him, the mom and dad, but just not the children. Right. And so it really hit personal to them and to me, and it was hard.
It's heart-wrenching, and it was, as Laura was talking about, this family who had the stocking ready for bring him home for Christmas. And I think of just our waiting families and just the process. Our adoptive families, they're very vulnerable. A lot of hoops they have to jump through. And I know, thinking just with the international and the extra hoops of the different countries and things that. And to think of this particular family at that waiting stage, they'd already met the child, and they're anticipating, bringing him back the next week. It's just, it's very, very sad to think that politics can, be. This child that it was so excited to finally have some permanency, and now, languishing in a orphanage, most likely. So.
Stephanie, talk to us about the foster care adoption process. You've worked in that. There's a few families in my church that are going through this right now, and suddenly seeing that, suddenly it makes it like, wow, this seems more possible than maybe I thought before. So just to briefly kind of help us understand what that process is like.
Absolutely. And there's such a need for kids, like I said before, that aren't going to be reunified with their families. Long-term foster care is not a great way to grow up at all. And so just to have that permanent home, have that family that said, hey, we're committed to you. And really, for people that want to adopt out of the foster care system, they can connect with a foster family agency. There's a lot of great foster family agencies with adoption licenses now in our greater area. Or they could go directly to a county and become a foster adopt home. And typically the process is, depending, pretty much the same as far as, the home inspection. They have to meet the same criteria as our adoptive families do. And they would, just through that process, they're going to, the county or the FFA worker is going to find out what type of child or sibling group that they're open to. And they will, when a group or a child becomes available, they'll let them know. And it's because of the encouragement, there's encouragement in place now, to adopt kids that are in the system that aren't going to reunify. And so now foster care money continues through Adoption Assistance Program, what we call AAP. So there's funding that continues until the child's 18, plus they can stay on Medi-Cal if the family chooses. Really, through the foster care system, there's very limited fees that the family will pay.
Right. So
there's more support.
It's much less expensive. It's not really an expensive thing. And we're doing that because there's all these kids in the system, and we want to get them out before they, before they turn 18.
Chances are you're not going to I mean, there are times that an infant can be placed if a mom has prior history with CPS and delivers a drug-exposed infant in the hospital, those type of situations. But most of the time with FOST-ADOPT, you're going to have a toddler, 2 or 3 and up,
Right.
It's not going to be an infant.
Right. But it seems like the older the kid, the more is like, boy, let's get them out of that system. Let's get them in somewhere permanent to help them.
Right. Absolutely. And then being open to sibling groups, too. There's such a need for that, keeping kids together.
When we founded God's Waiting Children, our original mission was only to focus on children over the age of 6. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was we felt that it wasn't as difficult to find adoptive families opening their homes to the younger ones.
Right.
But once a child reaches a school age, a lot of families just feel like it's too late, or it'd be too hard. So our last 8 years has been spent advocating for, quote, the older child, which is school age, 6 or older.
That's awesome.
Though we do infant adoptions.
Right.
Sergey's only 2, the one who is in Russia waiting.
Right. If there's a pregnant teen listening, or maybe if someone knows of a teen who's pregnant and maybe she's not yet sure what she wants to do, maybe she's thinking, maybe about adoption, although a lot of people don't end up choosing adoption, I think, sadly. And so does that person, does he need to basically decide, I'm definitely going to do adoption before contacting an adoption agency, or what would you advise that girl to do?
Absolutely not. She does not need to be sure. I think a lot of times people think that, and so they don't contact our agency. We work with women that are in crisis with an unexpected pregnancy. And so when they make a plan to parent, we connect them to resources. Pregnancy Care Center is a great resource we often connect our young moms to. And then, we just help them figure out pros and cons, what's parenting going to look like, what's adoption going to look like, and help them make the best decision that they can make, and really support them in that. So it's not all about adoption. Absolutely not.
I was talking to my pastor recently. We both were preaching last Sunday on Sanctity of Life Sunday at different churches, and he told me that he just kind of got wrapped up in the moment and basically said, he was talking about things that people could do if they want to be pro-life. And one of the things he said is, look, there's people here that have a bunch of money in a retirement account somewhere. You've got $1 million somewhere in a retirement account. You could give $30,000 to someone who wants to adopt a child. That would be, imagine if the entire pro-life community that was financially able to all went and were adopting kids through domestic adoption, international adoption, foster care. What a huge impact that would make. So consider that. Laura Boylan is the founder of God's Waiting Children. The website.
It can be a tax write-off, too.
It can be a tax write-off, too. Their website is godswaitingchildren.com. Stephanie Grant, Executive Director at Infant of Prague. You can check out their website at infantofprague.org. That's our show. Have a great week.
You've been watching Life Report, Pro-Life Talk, Real World Answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.